Hi, I'm Daniel Costello with Neutec in Rio Grande with part 2 of installing your J-zF casting machine. Today we'll be installing the consumables into your machine and getting ready for your first cast. Now the consumables are items that the machine uses that need replacement regularly. So let's get started. Your J-zF casting machine comes with a full set of consumables that you need for correct operation. Let's inventory them and inspect all of the critical areas of each item. The casting crucible, the pour nozzle, the pour hole bushing, the bushing retainer, the crucible stand, the crucible bottom gasket, the crucible shield, the filling cone, the thermocouple, the sealing rod, and the seal rod holder. One thing I do want to note is that the crucible, seal rod, pour nozzle, and centering bushing are all made of graphite. This means when these items are at elevated temperatures, they will burn up when they're exposed to the oxygen in the air. To get the most out of these consumables, make sure they are under a shielding gas anytime they are red hot. When changing consumables for different metals, we recommend a crucible cooling jar, which will cool your crucible fast and keep it from getting attacked by oxygen while it's hot. This is the case for all of the graphite consumables across any of the Neutec casting machines. Now that you've inventoried your consumables, let's begin the installation. To load the consumables, we will need to unscrew this knob and swing the hood open to see the inside of the crucible chamber. First, we will start with the pour hole bushing. The pour hole bushing keeps the pour nozzle centered in the machine and aligned with the center of the flask. We will need to make sure that this is not chipped or cracked and the pour nozzle fits inside with very little wiggle room. It will drop down right in the center hole of the bottom of the crucible chamber. We want to make sure that it's all the way down, and we can tell because the shoulder has fit into its recess flush. This is a very low wear consumable, and it can last for many months depending on usage. You will want to replace this when any of these centering tabs are broken or worn out, or when it's no longer to keep the pour nozzle centered. Once we have the pour hole bushing in its place, we can place the pour hole bushing retainer directly on top to hold it down. Next, we will install our crucible stand. The crucible stand insulates the crucible from the bottom of the casting chamber, and it also holds it at the correct height in the machine. We want to make sure that this is not cracked through where any heat could escape or allow the crucible to not sit correctly. We can just place this down in the bottom of the crucible chamber, roughly in the middle, with the wide side of the opening facing down. The pour nozzle will help us align it once we install it. This is another item that should last you a good while. If it cracks in half, you'll want to change this, but otherwise if it holds the crucible up straight, it should still be okay for use. Now we will install the crucible bottom gasket. The crucible bottom gasket is added insulation for your crucible, and it also gives a nice cushion for your crucible to rest on. We want to make sure that this is not torn before installation. This part will need to be replaced if it gets damaged or parts of it flake away because they are very delicate once they have been heated several times. Install this on top of the crucible stand and roughly align the two holes. Next, we can install the pour nozzle. The pour nozzle directs the metal into a nice stream as it leaves the crucible. This component is made of graphite, and it will see the extreme heat of the molten metal, so it will wear out more quickly. When the inside of the hole has increased to about 1/2 inch in diameter, or the nozzle end is worn unevenly, it is time to replace your pour nozzle. The pour nozzle slides right through the center of all these consumables, and the flange rests on the bottom gasket. Now we can install the crucible. The casting crucible is where the metal is melted before being poured into the flask. Let's make sure it's not cracked or broken and that the inside hole is nice and round. The main reasons to replace your crucible would be that the pour hole is enlarged or out of round, causing the molten metal to leak by. In just a minute, I'll show you how to check for a good seal using our sealing rod. To install the crucible, we will gently slide it down into the crucible chamber and make sure that the recess in the bottom of this crucible aligns on the flange and the pour nozzle. Now let's install the crucible shield. The crucible shield keeps the heat from your crucible contained and protects the heating coil inside your machine from getting damaged by the heat of the crucible. We want to make sure that this is not crushed and fully circular with no cracks to be in its best working order. Slide the crucible shield between the coil of the machine and the crucible until it sits flush with the top of the crucible. This consumable lasts for a while, but once it starts cracking at the top or bottom, or starts to get chipped or worn, you should change it. Remember, this consumable helps keep the heat of the crucible contained. So if it's worn or cracked, this can lead to less efficiency, causing longer heat up times and slower casting cycles. Don't be alarmed the first time you use this consumable if it begins to smoke. This is normal. There's just a binder that burns off the first time you use it. Just make sure you have proper ventilation. Now we just need to set our filling cone on top of the whole assembly and make sure it's centered. The filling cone funnels all of your grain into the crucible. We're going to want to make sure there's no cracks completely through it, but if there are small cracks present, it's not a big issue. It's mostly just a funnel, so as long as it can still guide grain into the crucible, it should be fine. Let's close and latch the hood. Now we will need our sealing rod holder and the included 2.5mm Allen wrench. The seal rod holder holds the seal rod and is able to be removed together with the seal rod when changing over the consumables to avoid metal cross-contamination. The sealing rod is what keeps the metal inside the crucible until it's at the right temperature. The sealing rod should be inspected before each casting day to ensure that there is no damage or wear that could cause issues with the castings. A worn sealing rod could lead to metal leaking by the seal rod and cause no-fills. We slide the hollow end of the seal rod into the seal rod holder until it seats all the way in. Now let's tighten the set screws with the Allen wrench snugly but not too tight because the seal rod can crack if it's tightened too much. Let's make sure neither screw head is protruding from the side of the holder because that can catch on the locating bore inside the hood and cause malfunction. Now let's install the thermocouple. This is what detects the temperature of your metal. We will want to make sure that this is not bent and there's no damage to the wires or the plug. There are two different types of thermocouples that this machine can use. A type K for lower temperature metals has a yellow plug, or a type S, which is for higher temperature metals, and that has a green plug. Take the thermocouple and insert it into the hole in the top of the seal rod holder. We should fill it bottom out in the end of the seal rod, which is what we're looking for. Now take the clip and secure the thermocouple in the holder by spinning it and latching the clip on. Now we can open the hood door with this knob on the side. Our sealing rod can slide into the center hole in the brass plate. Ensure the orientation of the tab on the seal rod is in the 2 o'clock position and the actuator rod is in the 10 o'clock position, so that way they line up when we close the door. Also, let's make sure our thermocouple wire is out of the way before we close the door. Let's close the door, making sure that the rod in the door slides into the hole on the seal rod holder. We can give the large seal rod knob a few turns back and forth about 90 degrees. This will spin the seal rod, and this is used to create a nice positive seal between the crucible and the seal rod. It should be done before every cast you do. But right now, we're just going to take a look at it cold and make sure that they're making a good seal. So now we'll open the hood and inspect the contact surface of the seal rod and the crucible. We should see a full shiny ring on both. If there is a break in the shiny ring in either of these components, you should replace it because that means there is a gap that will allow molten metal to flow prematurely and drip into your flask, causing no-fills. These consumables are new, so they should not have a problem with sealing, but it's always good to check. Now we can close the hood and we are ready to cast. Thanks for watching, and if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact us.